because we know that we are significantly more likely to be persuaded in a face-to-face response than in a digitally mediated response. In fact, 33 times more likely to say yes when asked face-to-face compared to if it was via email or text message or phone call.
Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hey Vanessa, welcome to the show.
Hi, Andrea. So excited to be here.
I am the one who's most excited. So thank you very much for your time. And as I told you, I've read your book, The Power of Saying No. So today we're going to talk about the art and science of saying no. Fantastic book, which I recommend to all of our listeners. And Vanessa, here is my first question. Now, one of the key takeaways from your book for me is that if we think about it, everything is a trade-off. When you say, as soon as you say yes to something, you are in effect saying no to something else. And so I'm interested, what inspired you to say yes to this particular topic for your book, for your research? Because you said yes to this one and you said no to potentially other subjects that you could have researched. So why this subject and not others?
Well, Andrea, I think you have hit on something that's absolutely fundamental to this work and the way I think about life in general, which is this idea that everything is a trade-off. And so being mindful and intentional about how you choose is really critical in pretty much any domain in life. This topic kind of emerged as being important through several life experiences I had. So, I grew up in India and I was going to work there and stuff like that. And if you read the book, I start the book with an instance where I recognize that so often in life and in work, we sometimes say yes when we want to say no, and we get stuck doing things that are really not important. And so that realization just sat with me for a while. And now, if I think about my research tends to straddle the areas of personal mastery and self regulation. So, I've written several papers on how do you make good choices? How do you make choices that benefit you in the long run? How do you resist temptation? And as I was doing this research, it turned out that, there are so many times we have to muster up the energy, the courage to say no to things. And yet there was absolutely no research out there which gives you an effective way to say no. And so, from a research standpoint, I thought that was really interesting. We have to say no, and yet there's no research out there. So, that's how I embarked on the research topics. And it was after I wrote these papers and I saw the response to this work by the media. So pretty much every newspaper that is known in the US covered this work, everything from the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times. And I realized that this is obviously an issue that people care about. And that's when I started developing it further and making it from research articles into a book that is research based.
It's definitely something I care about for
Hmm.
sure. I don't know about other people, but obviously, yes, the answer is yes for others as well. Now, talking about me in particular, a challenge I have is that I want to, on the one hand, I want to build and maintain a certain reputation. So, reputation for someone who gets things done, for someone who is also kind to other people.
Hmm.
I also want to build and maintain good relationships with others. That's important to me. And so sometimes that's why I find it hard to say no, because if I do, I have the fear that I may appear selfish, for example. So what are your thoughts?
So you've tapped on to some of the some of the reasons why people struggle with saying no. So, in my research, I find there are three main factors that drive kind of the reluctance to say no. And one is the concern for relationships, as you mentioned. Two is a concern for reputation. And three is just the lack of practice and just not having the ability or not having the practice to be able to learn to say no effectively. So, going back to some of the things that you mentioned, the concern for relationships is real. People do feel that, no is what we call a socially dispreferred response, which basically means that when people ask you something, they expect you to say yes. And saying no goes against that expectation. And we tend not to like things that go against other people's expectations. We resist that. We want to conform to those expectations. And so just saying no is a struggle. A lot of people also worry about no damaging their reputation because they might come across as maybe incompetent or incapable. If you say, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to do this in a work environment, it might come across that you're not able to do it, that you are not capable, that you can't handle all the multiple things that are thrown at you. And so recognizing that definitely affects our perception that, oh, wow, people are going to think that we are not capable. It's going to affect our reputation. And this boils down to really an effective way of saying no, which is learning the ability to say no while maintaining a good relationship with other people and securing your reputation. So, a fundamental premise of my work is this idea that you can say no in a way that secures your reputation and maintains your relationship. And the way you do that is essentially through this concept of empowered refusal. An empowered refusal is a way of saying no that stems from your identity. And because you say no in a way that stems from who you are saying no to the task. You are not saying no to the person. And as soon as you disentangle saying no to the task versus saying no to the person, it becomes so much easier to say no. You are not rejecting the other person by saying no. You're just giving yourself the opportunity to express your own desires.
Vanessa, so you mentioned empowered refusal, and yes, you
Mm-hmm.
talk about this in the book. For those who haven't read the book, can we talk about this in a little bit more detail? Can you explain the
Absolutely.
concept of empowered refusal?
Yes. So empowered refusal is a way of saying no that stems from your identity, which means it involves you looking inwards and responding to your no response, not with an excuse that is external to you, but with a rationale that stems from who you are, your principles, your values, your priorities. And what I've found in my research is that when you base your refusal in your identity, you get much less pushback from other people.
Can you, Vanessa, would it be possible for you to give us an example or
Yes.
anything that you think might be useful for listeners to understand this
Mhm.
concept? Uh, it could be again either an example or something else that makes us
Right.
understand empowered refusal versus the opposite of it.
Disempowered refusal. And so, I'll give you a simple example. So let's say that you really care to keep your evenings, say between 6 and 8 p.m., free of all work related phone calls, emails, etc., because it's family time. You want to dedicate 6 to 8 p.m. to kind of cooking and bath and good nights and all of that, right?
Which, by the way, is exactly what I want to do. So, perfect example
Perfect.
for me.
Exactly. So the way to do that is so it's grounded in something that you really care about. It's grounded in the idea that you want to reserve this time for your family. So there are people who are constantly phoning you or emailing you during that time. How do you handle that? How do you respond to that? The way you respond is not by saying, really, guys, I really cannot, I can't talk between this time. That is our natural response, right? To say, I cannot or I can't talk during this time because I'm doing all these other things with my family. That is what I call a disempowered refusal. Saying you can't is because it's an external force. If you say, hey guys, I don't take phone calls or emails during 6 and 8 p.m. because it's family time, it comes across as completely different. It is your decision, it is grounded in your values, it stems from your identity, and communicates a very stable and strong stance. It's not that you can't, because as soon as you say, I can't, people ask, why not? And then, hey, if it's an emergency, can I? No, you just shut the door on any negotiation as soon as you say, this is my decision. I don't take calls between 6 and 8 p.m. Do you hear the difference in the communication? It's a very subtle difference, and yet the choice of words really matter.
In this particular case, I don't versus I can't.
Yes.
And again, in the book, you talk about using empowered language. I think if I remember well,
Mhm.
you talk about standing up words or something along
Yes.
those lines. Can
I
you?
like,
Oh, yeah,
yes.
go ahead.
I love the concept of standing upwards because it's very hard to say, I never, I don't, I won't, and also come across as weak and disempowered. So I call them standing upwards because one of the people I was in one of my classes that I was training said that it's very hard to say these words without, standing up tall. And so when you say I don't, it's like standing up tall for yourself, for who you are and what you value.
So again, we're talking about, for example, you told us I don't versus I can't, I never, I
Hmm.
always.
Yes.
Anything else? Any
So
other?
these are what you call absolutist words. They essentially are words that stem from your identity. Using them definitely comes across as much more empowered, much more in control, much more in the driver's seat of your own life.
So using standing up words is a good thing to do. Now, not doing it is, let's say, is not a best practice if we want to say no effectively, if we want to communicate our choices effectively. Are there any other, in your research, Vanessa, are there any other common mistakes that people make when saying no or not being able to say no?
Yes. Yes. So very often people are so reluctant to say no that they don't communicate it effectively. They might do something which I call in the book a wishy-washy no, which is, I'm saying no, but if you really, really want me to, I'll figure it out and do it. Is that a yes or is that a no? I mean, it's unclear to the listener, right? To the person who's asking. I'm saying no, but if you want me to, I will. What is that? So I think being very clear about where you stand in terms of how you say no and the certainty and the confidence with which you communicate it is so important. The other thing is people very often lean on excuses. We are socialized to kind of come up with an external reason why we can't do something. So, I really can't because I have to work tomorrow. I really can't because I have to, go to the gym, or I really can't eat chocolate cake because I'm on a diet. All of these external reasons why you can't do something. And what I find in my research is that external reasons are, number one, external. Number two, they're often temporary. And when things are external and temporary, people think that that is something that is negotiable. So, one of the studies that I really love that I ran, because it really shows the power of this, is that people were asked to imagine that they needed $5,000 from a friend. And so they, went to a friend and asked that friend, can I please borrow $5,000 for a down payment on a condo, let's say. And the friend, I responded in either an empowered way versus a disempowered way. A disempowered way was, I really can't because of some external excuse, versus I really don't because I don't like to lend money to friends, because it very often comes in the way of friendship. And I value our friendship too much. So securing the relationship, hey, I really care about our friendship. I don't want money to come between us. So I'm not going to get into loaning you money. Now, in the short run, the friend, I asked participants, would you, would you accept that response? And they said, sure, we'd accept the response. But the crucial question I wanted to know is whether the empowered refusal had shut the door on asking for money again in the future. And so my question was, 5 years from now, you have a need for money again. Would you go back to that friend? When the friend gave a disempowered excuse, people were like, sure, I'll go back because it's external and temporary. Whereas if a person offers you a principle, something they believe in, I believe that I don't lend money to friends. That is not going to change now, 5 minutes from now or 5 years from now. So you're much more likely to say, I won't go back to that friend. So if you want to shut the door on a negotiation for the long run, thinking about how you can implicate your identity, implicate what you believe, who you are, because that is generally stable compared to an external response.
And also, that's a good example that illustrates what you said at the very beginning of this conversation, which is when we say no, we don't say no to the person.
Yes.
We say no to the specific request. In this particular example, we are actually saying to the person that you are so important to me
Yes.
that I value our relationship so much that I don't do this. So not only are we not saying no to the person, we are telling the person that we care so much about them that we
Yes.
don't do it. Love it. And okay, now some time ago, I worked with a client in preparation for a TEDx talk. And the title of that talk was The Power of Saying Yes. Now, your book is The Power of Saying No. So, who should I listen to? Because she was talking about the fact that if you want to succeed in life, personally, professionally, whatever success means for you, of course, it's different for different people. But she was saying you need to grab those opportunities that come your way. You need to say yes to opportunities. So, how do we balance the benefit or the potential benefit of saying yes to new opportunities with what we talked about so far, the need to also protect our own boundaries and saying no when we need to?
Absolutely. No, that's a really great question, and one that I've thought about quite a bit. And I've concluded that there are different times or different phases during which you say yes, and different times and phases where you say no. So I would argue that if you're in this mindset of exploration, trying to discover things, trying to learn more things, trying to expand yourself, expand your business, expand yourself, expand your knowledge base, explore opportunities. I call that an exploration mode. When you're in exploration mode, you do have to say yes so that you can expose yourself, explore, and figure out whether these things are working for you or not. However, at some point, you have to hone down on the thing that really matters and do that. And when you have a really clear set of priorities, I am going to target all my energies on this business, this audience, this idea. That's when you got to protect your time. That's when you will have to say no to everything else and focus on what really matters. And so there's an exploration phase where yes is an appropriate response, and then a focus phase, a prioritization exercise where you have to say no to the things that don't matter so that you can actually get the things that matter done.
Yeah. And in that particular phase, when you prioritize what
Mm-hmm.
really matters to you, in the book you talk about three competencies that you need
Mm.
to have, that you need to
Yes.
build, and you go through a framework that you call the ART framework,
Yes.
A.R.T. Again, for those who haven't read the book, can you elaborate?
For sure. So it's called the art of empowered refusal. And these are the three competencies that we need to develop to become more proficient at the empowered refusal. As you might imagine, this is something that needs practice because we don't really have much practice saying no. So we really got to practice these things. And it really begins with A, which is awareness, rules, not decisions, which is the R, and T, which is the totality of self. And I can go through that in a little bit of detail if you'd like.
Please.
So, empowered refusal begins with developing deepened self awareness. It involves you looking inside yourself and figuring out for yourself what really matters. What do I value? What do I want to achieve? What are my priorities? What do I care about? How do I want to show up in the world? This is stuff that involves self awareness and understanding of who you are, kind of an really an understanding of your identity as a human being. And after you do that, you need to develop a set of rules that help guide your actions and decisions. I call these rules personal policies. They're just simple rules that we can put in place that just serve as guideposts that shape our decisions. We can have rules about kind of how we like to spend our time, what we prioritize, the kind of work that we like to do, and just simple ways of living, right? And we can get into a few details in a bit if you'd like. And the final thing is once you've got the deepened self awareness and a set of rules that provide kind of an infrastructure that give you a framework or some sort of scaffolding around which you can frame your decisions, then you really need to get into the task of communicating that decision. And of course, a refusal is an act of speech. So it's really about saying no. But that saying no needs to be accompanied by empowered body language. And very often, and I'm sure you see this in communication quite often, that your words and our body language sometimes are not in sync, and the communication is very disrupted. Making sure that the words that you are saying and the body language that accompanies those words are in sync makes for much more effective communication. And so it's really important that not only do we learn to say empowered words like I don't, but that is accompanied by, us standing up tall and using empowered body language to show that we are not faltering in this decision. I very often talk about the idea that, our bodies can leak power. They can kind of signal to other people that I'm saying no with my words, but I can be persuaded otherwise. And that is a very weak refusal. An empowered refusal requires the totality of self, which means the words and the body language are in sync with each other. And so that's kind of the art of empowered refusal. I get into all the details I get into quite a lot of detail with a lot of examples about how do you develop deepened self-awareness? What do you say yes to and what do you say no to? How do you develop the personal policies? What are the ways in which our body language can be used to our advantage? So I think it's really about an intentional decision to invest in this skill because it is a skill that will benefit us in all domains of our lives.
Let's go, if you don't mind, Vanessa. I'd love for you to go into a little bit more detail when it comes to the rules, the personal policies.
Mm-hmm.
So again, how do we go about developing them, establishing them, implementing them?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around establishing and implementing those personal policies?
So it obviously begins with deepened self awareness. And with deepened self awareness, we can identify some of the pain points that we are experiencing in our lives. They can be something small like, oh, I am not sticking to my gym schedule, or something like, oh, people are calling me between 6 and 8 and it just causes me additional stress. So these are just insights that we get about ourselves, how we respond to things, what we would like to change, right? And that comes from reflection. We need to invest in that reflection. And once we've identified these pain points, then we can think about ways in which we can set up rules that help us navigate those pain points. What are some of those rules that we can set up? Sometimes we need rules that we communicate to others, and those are personal policies that I call announcements. So if you don't want people to call between 6 and 8 p.m., you got to tell them. It's an announcement, right? Now, there are other times, let's say that you are not sticking to your gym schedule, that is on you. You need to develop what I call self talk, which is personal policies that get you to do what you want to do. So that get you to focus on what you have deemed important. Self talk could require a set of personal policies like putting going to the gym on your calendar, getting a routine in place, not thinking too much about, oh, should I go? Should I not go? If it's 4 o'clock, the phone rings, time for the gym, you go, you switch on, you put on your shoes, you pick up your gym bag, you walk out the door and you close the door behind you. You are more likely to go to the gym if you do those sequence of actions, right? But if you debate it, you're not going to do it. So that's self talk. That's, you don't need to announce that to everybody. That's really stuff that you need to kind of put in place for yourself. So they're just simple ways of reinforcing the behavior that you would like to see in yourself and in others.
Out of curiosity, Vanessa, would you mind sharing some of your own favorite personal policies?
Absolutely. I obviously have many personal policies. So if you think about, I like to think about personal policies like how I think about travel. Like when we travel, we have our preferences and therefore we make certain decisions. So for example, I like aisle seats. I never take a red eye flight. If I'm coming to Europe, I'd never do it for less than a week because the jet lag is terrible. So if someone says come to Europe for 2 days or 3 days, I'm like, nope, not gonna do it because I know how my body responds to the jet lag. So I believe that if you can have personal policies around travel, you can have personal policies around pretty much everything. So for example, I'm a professor, so I have personal policies that suit my academic lifestyle. So I've arranged my schedule so I work from home on Wednesdays, right? And it's the day if there's a plumber that needs to come in, they come in. I'm working from home, so but it's an announcement that I've had to make to other people not to schedule meetings on Wednesday, and to myself to make sure that I don't show up to the office on Wednesday because then I'm breaking my own personal policy. So for years, I've been working from home on Wednesday. That's like a personal policy. I don't touch my phone when I'm driving. And I have my daughter who's sitting on the back seat who enforces that personal policy just in case I forget, which is quite useful. Sometimes you want support. And so it's just not safe to be driving on Houston roads looking at your phone, however important it is. So, things like that. So you just have these rules. And then I read every day, I write every day. Because that's essential to me being a productive academic. My mornings are protected. I don't usually have any meetings before lunch. My mornings are for creative work, for writing, and for research. All my administrative responsibilities are post lunch. And so these are just like rules that I have set up. And the great part about that, Andrea, is when you set up rules and you know what your preferences and priorities are, most people comply. So I only do podcasts on Thursday, typically. Okay. This is an exception because you're in Europe. And we are talking on a Monday. But what I've found is that when I say that I'm available for podcasts on Thursday, there's not a problem. It's just like mentally, Thursday is my podcast day.
Yeah, but it's I
And
can totally, because we share very similar personal policies.
ah,
Now, for example, I didn't know about your Thursday policy around podcast, because for me now you say this is today it's Monday, when we are recording this, and for me that's a personal policy. For me, Monday is podcast day.
yes.
Also, I almost always try to avoid calls or meetings before lunchtime. So I
Mm,
also protect my mornings for creative work or more productive type of work.
yes.
I Another policy I have is that I try as much as possible to have themed days. So, for example,
Mm,
Monday tends for me not to be a day where I do client work. Friday is also not a day where I do more administrative type of work. I tend to have Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays for clients. I also read every day. So we do share some personal policies, but regardless of what they are, for me this is so powerful, because when you have these rules, when you've established them, then it's much easier to implement them, because you don't really have to. I think you call it rules, not decisions. You don't have to
yeah.
make a decision.
Yes.
It's just the decision has already been made. There is no
Yes.
decision to make. So I love it. Great.
Yes,
Okay.
and once you have a rule in place, you can always invoke that rule. I often say, it's my if someone says there's a meeting on Wednesday, it's like I have a policy that I don't come to the office on Wednesday, so we'll have to reschedule that meeting. I mean, it's as simple as that because you have a rule and it's up to you to enforce that rule. And you have to kind of be mindful. But one of the important things is also to realize that, they are your rules. So as you evolve in your career, it's perfectly okay to kind of modify those rules, to change them to suit new life circumstances. With the COVID pandemic, for example, a lot of people who kind of had coached to develop personal policies reached out and said, "Oh my gosh, these personal policies are not working. Like I listen to a podcast on my commute, but I'm not commuting. So now what do I do?" So, circumstances come up where you need to kind of reevaluate and say, "These are my rules. So I need to kind of, if listening to a podcast is important to you, then you need to change your rule from I'm not going to do it during driving. Maybe I'm going to do it during a morning walk." Whatever it is, you have to modify it because circumstances change and life happens. But who we are and how we want to live our lives does not really change that much.
Before we continue with this episode, I just want to share a few resources that I think will be super useful for you. The first one is check out either my book, Confident Presenter, or my colleague Phil Wakenall's book, Business Presentation Revolution, or both. These are books for business owners and leaders who want to take their presentation skills to a higher level. To make the most of the books, take the Confident Presenter Scorecard, which is an online tool that allows you to assess your presentation skills for free in less than 3 minutes. And then also, at the moment, I'm running a series of free presentation skills web classes, and I'd love to see you there. The links are in the show notes. Now, let's go back to the episode. And sometimes, like what happened to me, for example, during COVID or after COVID, was that I ended up with one particular personal policy. I ended up establishing a new personal policy, which was exactly the opposite as the previous one. So,
Yeah.
for example, my personal policy was that for whatever weird reason, any conversation with a potential client, for me, if they were in London, I'm in London, it had to happen face to face. That's how my brain worked. Now, even if it could happen face to face, why not? But my personal policy is that just no, I don't leave home. We just do it online. So
Yeah.
the new personal policy is exactly the opposite of the previous one, but because it reflects something new in my life.
Yeah, renewed priorities, the strain of the commute. These are things that, and this comes from self-reflection, right? You have thought about, and that piece is so important, because if you want to set up a personal policy that works for you, it really needs to stem from an insight. So one of my favorite ones is this researcher who's at the Salk Institute. His name is Dr. Sejnowski, and he recognized that he gets a ton of ideas when he runs. So this was self-reflection. I'm running and I'm getting these really great ideas associated with research. So he loves going for runs because it kind of allows him to think about his research in a much more creative way. But he also realized, and once he gets a good idea, he tends to want to hold on to it so that he doesn't forget it. So there you've got this dilemma. On one hand, you're running, you're getting good ideas. On the other hand, you're like, oh my God, I can't forget it. He has this simple policy of just carrying a small notebook with him when he runs. So he'll stop, he'll jot his idea down, transfer it from head to paper, and then he frees his brain to continue with the good ideas. And this is a small thing. I carry a notebook with me when I run, which is the smallest thing, personal policy to have, but it makes a huge difference. And it's so unique to him, right? What works for him. And I think it reflects the importance of coming up with personal policies based on our own understanding of ourselves and what we care about, how we want to live our lives, and that they are unique to us. Like I might take my phone running because I rather put it on my phone. But for him, writing it down on a piece of paper just like is so much faster, easier, less likely to forget, whatever. Whatever it is, it's the idea that you have to make your personal policies your own.
Now, Vanessa, when we do all of these things, we've got our personal priorities, awareness, rules, and we also understand and practice saying no effectively, all of the things that we talked about so far.
Mhm.
But still, sometimes it might happen that we say no, and then there's a bit of a pushback from the other person. How how do we deal with that?
Yeah. And that's pretty common, especially if you're a people pleaser who has always said yes. Suddenly saying no is going to surprise people. And so people are going to be like, oh, I always manage to get this person to do stuff for me. So I'm going to push back. And so learning how to resist that pushback is a huge aspect of the power of saying no. If you firmly believe that this is something that you want to say no to and you use empowered refusal, for the most part, you don't get pushback. But in the event that you do, there are strategies that you can put in place. So if there are if this is something that happens occasionally, then you can kind of figure out ways to kind of stand your ground, to repeat your no again, to just remind the person, I just said no, and it's a decision I've made. It's just invoking a personal policy. However, there are some people that we might encounter, unfortunately for us, who will not take no for an answer regardless of whether it's empowered or not. If you say no, they will just always push back. Fortunately, these are few and far between, and these are what I call in my book walnut trees. Walnut trees are people who prioritize what they want over what you want, always, right? It's their way, it's what they want. And I call them walnut trees because it's kind of a drawing on this idea that the Black American walnut is this huge tree that has an imposing canopy. It dominates the landscape. And it has a root system that goes out like 50 feet. But what that root system does, it exudes into a soil a compound called juglone. And juglone is a herbicide. So while the root system helps the walnut tree flourish and thrive in this environment, it stunts the growth of everything around it. This is very much like people who will not take no for an answer. They are the kind of people who, in the literature, we call toxic or jerks. These are people who, you know, it's their way. It's what they want. They don't even hear you when you say no. And you need a unique set of strategies, a difference or a battle plan, if you will, when you're dealing with a person who just will not take no for an answer. At that point, your empowered refusal is going to go only this far. You need much more stronger forces that you need to put into play. Like you need to push back and defend yourself as much as they are pushing back on you. You need to kind of take that conversation and convert it from maybe a face to face, because we know that we are much more, significantly more likely to be persuaded in a face to face response than in a digitally mediated response. In fact, 33 times more likely to say yes when asked face to face compared to if it was via email or text message or phone call. So if you are dealing with a walnut tree, there's some practical strategies. Try and not deal with them face to face, because walnut trees are experts at getting you to say yes and pushing you in a corner where you really can't say no, right? They very often will insist on a response immediately. Right? Tell me now, yes or no, tell me now. And you need to buy time. You always need to kind of say, well, hold on, I cannot commit to this right now. Or I need some time to check my calendar. I need to arrange a few things before I commit. Whatever. The words need to be tip of your tongue so that you are much more able to deal with a walnut tree and them pushing back aggressively on you. So I talk a great deal in the book about these strategies that we can learn and we can develop and we can practice when we encounter walnut trees.
A couple of things. One is that the good news is that, as you said, if you learn how to say no effectively using empowered language, standing up words, for example, then most
Hmm.
likely things go as they should go. So
Yes.
that's the most important thing. And also walnut trees. Now, one of the things I like about your book is that you use those great analogies. Now, there are a few others, like you talk about some types of asks that
Hmm.
we sometimes
Yeah.
receive, and some of them you say we should avoid them. Others, it may be why not a good idea to accept them. Like, for example, I've captured here, you talk about the pass the salt asks,
Hmm.
make your famous lasagna asks, the hero's journey asks. Again, for those who haven't read the book, can you tell us more?
Absolutely. So, one of the big questions is, what do I say yes to and what do I say no to? Right. So, before you can say no to something, you actually have to have some sort of framework or some sort of decision making tool that helps you decipher the ask. So, an ask comes your way, you have to decide, do I say yes? Do I say no? And so, I came up with this decipher your ask tool that has two dimensions. One is the benefit that saying yes can confer to the asker. So sometimes by saying yes, you can make a huge positive difference in someone's life versus no difference at all. Anyone could do it, doesn't really make a difference. So, on one hand, the benefit to the other, and weigh that benefit with the cost of saying yes to you. So, what is the cost that you will incur if you say yes? And that cost can be in terms of time. It can be in terms of emotion. So you might that saying yes might make you feel tired. Saying yes might make you feel frustrated. Saying yes might make you feel resentful. Saying yes might just make you grumpy. All of those are costs, right? And so we need to understand, if I said yes, what are the costs that I will have to incur other than time, maybe money, maybe energy? And that cost can be high or low depending on the type of ask. So the first category of asks is what I call pass the salt asks. Pass the salt asks are asks that are low cost to you but confer a high benefit on the asker. So imagine you're sitting at a dining table and the salt shaker is sitting in front of you. And someone says, would you mind passing the salt? And you say, sure, pick it up, drop it over. Okay, very easy for you to do, but presumably makes a huge difference to that other person's meal. So hence a pass the salt ask. You should say yes to pass the salt asks because you have the opportunity to use a little bit of your energy, time, emotions to make a huge difference, right? And so, in our domains, whatever domain we are in, we might have things that are pass the salt ask. So, for example, as a professor, a pass the salt ask is writing recommendation letters for me. So, if someone asks me to write a recommendation letter, I have a system in place. I know how to write a recommendation letter pretty quickly. And I also know that a recommendation letter can make a huge difference to a student's life. And hence, for me, writing a recommendation letter is a pass the salt ask. And so I typically say yes to those kinds of asks. So there are certain things, and we should all reflect on what are the things that come easy to us, but make a huge difference to other people. Those are things that are in our wheelhouse and that are really worth investing in because hey, you can make a difference in someone's life. The probably the most problematic asks are the ones which take a ton of our energy and time and effort and make us grumpy and tired and miserable, but they actually have no effect on the world. It doesn't make a positive difference on the world at all. These are what I call bake your famous lasagna asks. So, bake your famous lasagna asks are the things that we really should say no to because they suck us of energy, they make us grumpy, and yet they really have no impact on anything. So, one of the stories I tell in the book is imagine that you have been invited for a potluck party and everybody is bringing something. And the host tells you, hey, why don't you bake your famous lasagna? Because it's so delicious. And of course, we know that baking a lasagna takes a lot of time and energy. And so, should we do that for a potluck? And so, it's something that we have to think about. Well, is it worth the time and energy? If I am going to spend my whole day baking a lasagna, taking it to a potluck party where everybody else has bought store bought cookies and muffins and stuff like that, should I invest that time and energy disproportionate to everybody else? And so you can think about things that we spend our time on that are like bake your famous lasagna asks. Things that drain us of energy, that we don't really enjoy, that make us feel resentful and frustrated. And yet can't they don't make a huge difference in the world, whether that's in our jobs or in our personal lives. I very often have emails after I wrote the books from readers who will be like, I recognized whatever it is as a bake your famous lasagna ask, and it gave me the permission to say no, and I am just so much happier. And so just recognizing like that this is a bake your famous lasagna ask that I have been doing for a while, but it needs to stop. That leaves us with the energy and the time to focus on what I call hero's journey asks. Hero's journey asks, they might be things that are difficult to do and time consuming and take a lot of us, but worth doing. Worth doing because they matter, worth doing because they make a positive difference. Nothing in life that's worth doing is going to be easy. But if you are spending all your time doing things that don't matter, then you don't have the time to do the things that do. And so, when we use the decipher your ask framework, we tend to prioritize who we are and we prioritize what's important and the impact and the legacy that we can leave.
There's only a caveat here, Vanessa, which is that if you go to that party and you are Italian, as I am, and you see the lasagna there, that makes a huge difference in my world. So that just kidding, but I know that you wanted to call it biryani, right?
Yes, I
But
did. I
yeah.
did. So, I'm of Indian origin, and the Indian equivalent of a lasagna would be a biryani, uh, because I'm actually really well. I make a really good biryani, and but I make it and I reserve it for special occasions with special people because it's a tedious and long and time-consuming process because many steps. So I protect, I make it often. So I thought about calling it make your famous biryani ask, but then I would have to do way more explanation. So I decided to call it bake your famous lasagna ask. But
Right.
yes, that's good homework, Andrea.
Yeah. And right, as we get closer to the end of this conversation, Vanessa, maybe it's something that we talked about already when you were talking about personal policies, rules, but just in case there is anything else that you think we need to add there. Otherwise, we can skip the question, no problem. So when we think about the power of saying no, we often think about saying no to others.
Hmm.
But there's also an element sometimes of knowing how to say no to ourselves. So again, maybe that's connected to what we talked about with personal policies.
Yes.
Or
In
yeah.
some ways, because there's a bit about self-talk that we talked about. In fact, Andrea, the research, the first paper that I wrote on this topic was really about saying no to yourself. It was about self-talk and the power of self-talk and the choice of words that we use to ourselves and how that self-talk reinforces our identity and shapes who we are. And so self talk is such an important aspect of our lives, like how we talk to ourselves, the way we think, the things we tell ourselves matter and shape how we act and behave. So I think that when it comes to self discipline, we know from the research that there are different ways in which we can offer ourselves self talk. So self talk tends to be either instructional. So, for example, you can tell yourself, if I want to go to the gym, I need to now put on my shoes, get my gym bag, close the door, drive to the gym, or walk to the gym, whatever it is. That's instructional self talk. There's also motivational self talk. We can tell ourselves, oh, shucks, I really don't feel like going to the gym today. That's not motivational. Or think about how wonderful we'll feel after we've got all those lovely, happy hormones coursing through our body after the gym, right? So the way we talk to ourselves, how we frame things to ourselves, the words that we use really matter. And so I have spent a lot of time thinking about ways in which we can be more compassionate and kind to ourselves in order to achieve our goals. What are some of the things that we can do in our lives, the small things that we can do that make it more likely that we achieve what we want to achieve, but in a way that's kinder and more compassionate? So when we st- un- take the time to understand ourselves and our preferences, then we are more likely to be aligned in our actions when we use self talk that matters, that resonates with us. So, recognizing small things about ourselves and how we like to operate. So, for example, if I've got an early morning meeting, or a big event, or maybe a talk on a particular day, I definitely reserve the evening before for, just quiet, no going out, no hanging out anywhere. If and it's just like something that you learn about yourself. You're calmer, more centered, more focused. If you've not been, out chatting and talking the previous evening, right? So that's something that's unique to me, perhaps. Some people can do it, no problem. But for me, if I need to perform really well in the next morning, there are certain conditions that I need to have the previous night, right? And so that's like self talk, is how you decide to accept an invitation, maybe to go to a party on a day before an event. And so that's the kind of discipline that you can enforce by just simply learning about how you operate and then shaping your personal policies around that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it does. It does make a lot of sense. So I guess for us to be able to say no to ourselves, we need to know ourselves. So that's
Yes, absolutely.
it goes back to awareness. So awareness about
Yes.
ourselves, yeah, how we operate.
And
Perfect.
also developing self insight. So having a general, not only awareness, but awareness at a different level where we're like, okay, this is how I like things to be, which is more insightful than just awareness. Like an understanding of what our true preferences are, how we like things to be.
Talking about insights. So, for example, going back to what I shared earlier, that one of my personal policies was to always have a conversation with a potential client in person if that person
Hmm.
was in London, was because I assumed, and that's why I found it interesting. I didn't know about your that start that if you are in person, it's 33% more likely that you will be persuaded or something
Persuaded.
along those
Yeah.
lines. I didn't know about
Yeah.
that, but I just assumed that that was the case, that for me to be able to convince someone, for them to say yes, let's work together, we had
Uh-huh.
to be face to face. And maybe that's, I don't know if it's true or not, it was just my assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Then because of COVID, it was impossible to have
Mm-hmm.
those in-person conversations, and people said yes anyway. And so my insight was that actually I don't have to have those conversations in
Yeah.
person because people can say yes
Yeah.
online as well. So that was my insight. And that's why I
Yeah.
changed the personal policy.
Absolutely. And that's the same thing with teaching. For example, I had never taught online before the pandemic because I felt that I'm most effective in the classroom in person. And of course, there's also a huge barrier to learning how to teach online, right? But then I had tons of practice during the pandemic, and I find that I'm equally effective, and maybe in a different way, but in terms of effectiveness, equally effective online or in person. So if you ask me, do I want to teach a class online or in person? If it's, if it requires me to commute, I'm going to say, hey, I'm perfectly fine with doing it online because I'm not seeing any differences in the impact that it has. And so this is just something that you just learn and you evolve, and sometimes you have to develop the skill sets around some of these things. Like, I very often think, if I want this to be this way, what are the things I can change or do to make that happen? What do I need to refine? What can I do better? How can I, make it more interactive, even though it's online, which requires you to learn a few skills and invest in that. But in the long run, it benefits you because that's your preference. So absolutely, there are so many important ways in which we could make our lives slightly easier and more aligned to our preferences if we just thought about, how can we adjust this, how can we make this work.
Yeah. And Vanessa, when you were talking about your own personal policies, you said that one of them is that you read every day.
Hmm.
So beyond your own book, which again I recommend to all of our listeners, we're going to include the link in the show notes. But if you think about what we talked about today, in general, are there any other books that you would recommend to our listeners?
I have a lot of books that I recommend to people all the time. So I read broadly, both fiction and nonfiction. I like to read business books, but I also read nonfiction across the board. I love history. I like politics. I love reading about esoteric subjects. So, for example, I read a fantastic book last week on salt. Salt. the history and the story of salt over time and the central position it's had in so many economies, and just like fabulous things about salt, which I had no idea about. So I think reading just fuels my curiosity. In terms of really excellent books that are related to my topic, I would say that, you know, Shonda Rhimes wrote a book called The Year of Yes, which was very much shaped my thinking about when you say yes and when you say no. So Shonda Rhimes, as you might know, is a producer and maker of many lovely shows like Bridgerton. Um, so, I was really curious about her book, which is The Year of Yes. And what I found was The Year of Yes happened when she was really in exploration mode. Saying, what I'm at the point in my career that I need to figure out, what do I do? And so the Year of Yes was just like, let's explore all these different things and see, where do I want to go. But once she decided what she wanted to do and focused, then I'm sure now she recognizes that the only way you can be as productive as she is by saying no to all the other options, right? Just focusing on the thing that she's decided to focus on. So I like that one. Vanessa Bonds has a really nice book called You Have More Influence Than You Think, which is the flip side of the coin of the power of no. So my book is like, hey, you got to say no. And she talks about, how do you influence people? People are so easily influenced. If you want something, all you have to do is ask, right? And people will say yes to the most ridiculous things. Like, so she does these experiments in which she has people ask people for really strange things, like, hey, knock on the door, hey, can I play soccer in your backyard? Okay. Hey, will you defile this library book? Okay. I mean, very odd things. And so for me, actually, Vanessa and I have spoken quite a bit, and we're quite happy that the two Vanessas have also, one has done a book on influence and one has done a book on no. So it's kind of funny. So I really like that book. If you want to think about no in a more formal business setting, the power of oh, can't remember the name, but it's a really excellent book. It's on negotiations and the importance of knowing, looking inwards, knowing your position, and being able to say no in a negotiation. I can
After
send you the
after
name of the
this
book,
after this
actually.
conversation, Vanessa, if you don't mind,
I will.
if you have some time to just go back to that book, if you remember it, please feel
Yes,
free to let me know, and I'm going to include it in the show notes as well.
absolutely. That'd be great.
Thank you. No, thank you for sharing those books. And is there a question that I didn't ask,
Hmm.
but you wished I did? Again, if you think about the art and science of say no, your book and your research, your work, have I missed something important that I should have mentioned or asked?
So I guess I wouldn't mind talking a little bit about next steps and where this is going.
Let's do it.
Okay. So one of the things I'm super excited about, Andrea, is the kind of impact that the book has had in the year that it's been launched. So yes, day before yesterday made 1 year since the book has been launched. And it has been so gratifying to see how positively it has been received by so many people. And so I love receiving messages and emails to hear about how that book has made a difference in people's lives, and it has, which is more than I could ever ask for. I'm also excited about the fact that it's being translated into several languages. So as I mentioned to you, I have Italian here,
So for
and maybe
our
you can say
Italian
this better.
So for our Italian friends who are listening to this episode, not watching it, so Vanessa is holding a book in Italian, and the title is Adesso riesco a dire no, which means, like, if we want to translate it now, so literally it means now I can say no. or now I'm
Hmm.
able to say no, something along those lines.
Right. And then French, which is also out,
Yeah, which I
which I'm
can't, like
excited,
my
which I'm
friend,
excited about.
yeah, my
It's
French
it
pronunciation,
translates into the incredible power of no.
right.
Uh, and I'm excited also about other languages throughout the world, which is really an incredible thing. I'm also investing a lot of my time in speaking engagements and sharing my thoughts and ideas with different audiences. I also do workshops and training. So if anyone's interested, please reach out because that's really something that I'm developing and it's going really well. So I'm excited about that as kind of a new avenue for me to explore.
And by the way, if people do want to reach out, if they want to
Uh-huh.
say hi, or if they want to learn more about your work, if they want to reach out to you for other types of opportunities, what's the best way?
So LinkedIn is a great way. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can just search for me on LinkedIn, Vanessa Patrick. And my website is vanessapatrick.net. So there's a way to contact me via the website, but honestly, LinkedIn is really super efficient as well.
Perfect. And again, we're going to include the links in the show notes. Let's finish with this,
Perfect.
Vanessa. Let's say that somebody has watched this episode, they listened to the conversation, and then after a while they forgot everything. Let's say that they forget everything. Again, no, it's not your fault. It's just the way a
Yes.
brain works. But let's say that they remember one thing, just one
Mhm.
thing. And if they remember that thing, you will be happy. What's the most important thing you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
That's a very good question. I would say that you have the permission to say no to the things that don't matter. And there is a way of saying no that allows you to communicate that no without worrying about the consequences, without worrying about your relationship with the other person and with the reputation. So go back to the book and learn the art of empowered refusal all over again.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.
Thank you, Andrea. It was a great pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.